The 10 years I spent away from that house had done nothing to shrink it. If anything, it had grown, feeding on the forest that crowded its stone walls, drawing itself up into a jagged silhouette against the perpetually gray New England sky. The crunch of my tires on the long gravel driveway was a sound I remembered from childhood, a sound that always meant I was home, and never in a good way. Chicago was home now. My apartment with Sarah, filled with sunlight and the smell of coffee. This place smelled of wet stone and secrets. My mother greeted me at the door. Her hug was brief, her body stiff as the antique furniture that filled the foyer. She was a Davenport through and through. Grief was an inconvenience to be managed, not an emotion to be displayed. "Alexander," she said, her voice the same crisp monotone I remembered. "The lawyer is waiting in the library." My Aunt Catherine was there, perched on a love-seat, her face a mask of pinched solemnity. And my younger brother, Mark. He stood by the fireplace, not looking at me, just staring into the flames that offered no warmth to the cavernous room. He nodded once when I entered. That was it. 10 years, and all I got was a nod. The lawyer, a man named Peters, who looked as old as the house itself, cleared his throat. He got straight to the point. The legalese washed over me. Trusts, holdings, properties, until he landed on the final, impossible sentence. And as such, the entirety of the Davenport estate, along with the title and responsibilities of head of the family, is bequeathed to my sole heir, Alexander Davenport. The room was silent. I waited for Mark's outburst, for my aunt's sharp intake of breath, for my mother's cold disapproval. Nothing. It didn't make any sense. I was the one who ran away. Mark was the one who stayed, the dutiful son. I looked at Mark. He was looking at me now, finally. But there was no anger in his eyes, no jealousy. It was something else, something I couldn't place. It looked almost like pity. "Well," I started, trying to break the heavy air. I don't know what to say. This is obviously a mistake. Mark should be." My mother cut me off. "There is no mistake, Alexander." She stood up. Then my aunt stood up. Then Mark. They moved together, a single rehearsed motion. It wasn't like they were coming to congratulate me. It was like they were closing in. "There is the matter of the succession," my mother said, her voice flat. Mark approached me. In his hand was the Davenport signet ring, a heavy piece of gold with a black onyx stone, the family crest carved into it. My father had never taken it off. I remembered the weight of his hand, that cold metal pressing against my cheek when I was a child. Mark held it out, not to me, but to my mother. She took it and turned to me. "Your hand," she commanded. "What is this?" I asked, a nervous laugh catching in my throat. "Some kind of coronation? It's the 21st century." No one smiled. "Your hand, Alexander," she repeated. I felt a strange prickle of unease. This was more than just odd family tradition. The air was thick with it. I slowly extended my left hand. A mistake. My aunt moved with surprising speed, her thin, strong fingers clamping down on my wrist. At the same time, my mother grabbed my fingers, forcing them open. "What the hell are you doing?" I tried to pull back, but their grip was like iron.
Mark came around the other side and pressed my arm flat against the polished surface of the mahogany table, 3 of them holding me down. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't right. My mother forced the ring onto my ring finger. It was too small, or my knuckles had gotten bigger. She pushed hard. I felt a sharp, grinding pain in my joint, and a small, dry pop echoed in the quiet room. The cold metal slid into place, tight against my skin. The moment it settled, they released me. And then, in perfect unison, their voices blended into one low, chilling drone. The head is the shepherd. The shepherd protects the flock. They stepped back, their faces blank, their duty apparently done. I stared at them, then down at the ring on my throbbing finger. The cold of the gold was seeping into my bone. I looked at Mark again. That same look was on his face. Pity. Deep, profound, and terrifying. Dinner was a silent affair. Every scrape of a fork on a plate seemed to echo off the high, dark ceilings. I felt their eyes on me.
Watching how I ate, how I held my glass. I wasn't their long-lost son or brother. I was something else now, a specimen under a microscope. I excused myself as soon as I could, claiming exhaustion from the flight. The lie tasted a lot less bitter than the food they'd served. Sleep wouldn't come. My room, the same one I'd had as a boy, felt like a cage. The old furniture seemed to watch me. The portraits of long-dead Davenports in the hallway outside seemed to whisper. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up. There was one place in this house that had always been off-limits, my father's study. The door was locked, of course, it always was. But I remembered an old trick. A single sturdy paperclip from a desk drawer in the hall was all it took. The old lock was simple, and after a few seconds of fumbling, I heard a soft click. The door swung open with a low groan. The air inside was stale, smelling of old leather, pipe tobacco, and something else, something vaguely chemical, like antiseptic. It was untouched, a museum to a man I barely knew. I ran my fingers over the spines of his leather-bound books, not really looking for anything in particular, just an answer, an explanation for the bizarre ceremony, for the look in my brother's eyes. Behind a row of medical encyclopedias, my fingers found something else, not a book, a ledger, thin, bound in dark green vinyl. I pulled it out. There was no title on the cover. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was a doctor's scrawl, hard to decipher. The name at the top of the page made my breath catch. Arthur Davenport, my grandfather. It was a medical log, dated from the late 1980s. I sat down in my father's heavy leather chair and read. The notes were clinical, detached. Patient exhibits increased paranoia. Accusations against family members. Episodes of unprovoked aggression. Page after page detailed a rapid mental decline, memory loss, incoherence, loss of motor functions. It was terrifying. I never knew my grandfather had been sick like this. They'd always said it was a series of strokes. This was not strokes. This was something else entirely. I flipped towards the end of the logbook. The last few entries were short, terse. Patient fully sedated. Patient non-responsive. Then the final entry. Just a date.
and tucked between the last 2 pages was a photograph. A Polaroid, its colors faded with age. It fell onto the desk, face up. The man in the picture was sitting in a wheelchair. He was skeletal, his skin stretched tight over the bones of his face. His clothes hung off him like a scarecrow's. But it was his eyes. They were wide, staring, but there was nothing behind them. Absolutely nothing. A hollowed-out man. I picked it up. My hand was shaking. On the white border at the bottom, someone had written a name and a date in black ink. But it was the writing on the back that made the cold dread from the ring spread through my entire body. I turned it over. Arthur Davenport. Transfer complete. 10/17/1988. Transfer. Not deceased. Not passed away. Transfer complete. It wasn't a medical term. It was a term of logistics, of property, like a piece of furniture being moved from one room to another. I dropped the photo on the desk as if it had burned me. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What did it mean? What transfer? Cree. The sound came from the hallway, a floorboard. The old house was full of noises, I told myself. It's just the house settling. But then I saw it. A shadow slipping beneath the crack under the study door. It moved into the sliver of light from the desk lamp, and then it stopped. Someone was standing right outside, listening, waiting. I held my breath, every muscle in my body frozen. The house was completely silent again, but I knew I wasn't alone. The shadow didn't move. It just stayed there. A silent, patient sentinel in the dark. The first thing I registered was the sun. A single, sharp blade of light cutting through a gap in the heavy curtains, striking the side of my face. I had fallen asleep in the chair, my head resting on my folded arms on the desk. The Polaroid of my grandfather was still there, face up, his vacant eyes staring at the ceiling. My neck was stiff and my mouth tasted like old coffee. For a moment, it was just a dull ache and morning light. Normal. Then the memory of the shadow under the door came back. A cold water jolt that made me sit bolt upright.
My heart started its frantic, familiar drumming. I listened. Nothing. Just the ancient groans of the house settling around me. I pushed myself up, my joints protesting. The shadow was gone. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, a product of an exhausted mind. I reached for the doorknob, intending to go to my room, splash some water on my face, and try to piece together some kind of plan. I twisted the heavy brass knob. It didn't move. I tried again, with more force. It turned about 1/4 of an inch and then stopped with a hard, metallic clack. I rattled it. The sound was flat and final. Locked. Locked from the outside. Okay, I took a breath. This is an old house. The lock is probably just jammed, that's all. I stepped back, examining the door. It was solid oak, thick and imposing. I put my shoulder into it, once, then twice. It was like shoving a wall of stone. The only thing that moved was a small cloud of dust from the top of the frame. Panic started to bubble in my chest, hot and acidic. I fought it down. Think, Alex, don't just react. I don't know how long I was in there. An hour, maybe 2. I tried every angle on the door. I looked for another way out, but the study's single window was a large, single pane of glass overlooking a 20-foot drop to a stone patio. It was sealed shut with age and paint. I was a prisoner. The thought was so absurd, so outlandish, that I almost laughed. This wasn't happening. Then I heard footsteps in the hall. They were slow, deliberate. They stopped right outside the door. I held my breath. A key scraped in the lock. It turned with a loud, mechanical clunk, and the door swung open. Mark stood there. He wasn't looking at me, but at a spot on the floor just past my feet. He held a silver tray with a cup of coffee and a single croissant on it. I fell asleep in here, I said, my voice hoarse. I was testing him, waiting for his reaction. I know, he said, quietly. Mother said you were probably tired. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to come out. There was no explanation, no apology. Just a cup of coffee and a face etched with that same awful pity. I pushed past him, ignoring the tray. I didn't say a word. I just walked, fast, down the main staircase, through the cold foyer, and wrenched open the heavy front door. The cool, damp morning air hit my face, and for a second I thought I was free. I broke into a run, the gravel of the driveway crunching under my dress shoes. I just needed to get in my car, start the engine, drive. I wouldn't stop until I saw the Chicago skyline. My Mercedes was where I'd left it, but it was tilted strangely to one side, leaning like a wounded animal. I stopped dead. All 4 tires were flat, not just low on air. They were completely deflated. The rubber wrinkled and folded against the rims, pressing into the gray stones of the driveway. It wasn't a slow leak. This was deliberate. A necessary precaution, I'm afraid. The voice came from the porch. My Aunt Catherine was standing there, holding a delicate teacup. She hadn't been there a moment ago. She looked calm, placid, as if commenting on the weather. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a rage that was quickly overpowering the fear. "What the hell did you do to my car?" "Standard safety procedure, Alexander," she said, taking a small sip of her tea. "For the transition period. We can't have you getting overwhelmed and driving off in an agitated state. It wouldn't be safe." "Transition period? What are you talking about? I'm leaving this madhouse." She sighed, a small, weary sound. "You can't leave. You're the head of the family now. You carry the legacy." She looked at me, her eyes devoid of any warmth. "I suppose your father never explained it. He always did try to shield you. The truth is, Alex, the Davenport legacy isn't the money. It's biological." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I remembered the medical log. Paranoia, aggression. "It's a rare, degenerative neurological disorder," she continued, her voice as clinical as the notes I'd read. "Hereditary. It affects the designated carrier in each generation. It's what happened to your grandfather, what your father was managing." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Becoming the head of the family isn't an honor, dear. It's a diagnosis. The tests confirmed it years ago. Your genetic markers are the strongest. You are the one who needs to be managed." For the protection of the rest of us, and for the family name, of course. I just stared at her, my mind reeling. A disease. It was all a lie. They were insane. "You're lying," I whispered. "Are we?" she asked, her eyebrows arching slightly. "Try your phone."
My hand trembled as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I already knew what I would find. The screen was lit up, but in the top left corner were the words I dreaded: "No service." They must have a signal jammer, a professional one. I felt a wave of nausea. This was planned, all of it. I turned and ran again, this time down the long driveway toward the main road, toward the gate. It was at least a quarter of a mile, and I ran with everything I had, the gravel skittering under my feet. As I got closer, the hope died. The huge wrought iron gates, the ones that were always kept open, were now shut tight. A thick, greasy chain was wrapped around the bars, secured by a heavy-duty industrial padlock, the kind they use on storage units. I was locked in. The entire estate was a cage. I walked back to the house, defeated. Every window on the ground floor, I now noticed, had small, new-looking bolt locks drilled into the frames from the inside. They hadn't been there when I was a kid. This place wasn't just a house. It was a private asylum. I found Mark in the library, staring into the cold fireplace again. He didn't turn as I entered. "She told me," I said, my voice flat, "about the disease." He flinched, but still didn't look at me. "It's for the best, Alex." "The best?" I finally snapped, my voice rising. "You locked me in my father's study. You flattened my tires. You've turned this house into a prison. Is that for the best?" He finally turned to face me. The pity in his eyes was so profound it made my skin crawl. Fighting it only makes it worse. That's what happened to Grandpa. He fought it. He got angry. He had to be restrained. Father learned from that. He was much more accepting of his role. He took a step toward me and put a hand on my shoulder. His touch was soft, but the weight of it was immense. It felt like a chain. "Please, Alex, just accept it. Let us help you. We'll take care of you, just like Dad took care of Grandpa." That was it. That was the line that broke something inside me. The image of the hollowed-out man in the Polaroid flashed in my mind. Transfer complete. That's what care meant in this family. It meant sedation. It meant imprisonment. It meant erasing a person until nothing was left but a vacant shell in a wheelchair. And now it was my turn. My anger vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Panic wouldn't work. Fighting them physically wouldn't work. There were 3 of them, and they had the whole system on their side. I had to think. I had to play their game. I let out a long, shuddering breath, a performance of defeat. I let my shoulders slump. "Okay," I whispered, looking at the floor. "Okay, Mark." He squeezed my shoulder, a gesture of misguided relief. "It'll be all right, Alex. You'll see." I had to survive. That was the only thought in my head. "Okay, Alex, you're an architect. You design buildings. You understand structures, weaknesses, escape routes. Every building has a way out. You just have to find it." That evening, dinner was served again in the cavernous dining room. This time, I ate. I made eye contact. I answered their polite, empty questions about my life in Chicago. I played the part of the prodigal son, broken and returned to the fold. I could feel their collective tension ease with every bite I took. After the main course, my mother stood and went to a sideboard. She returned with a tall, old-fashioned glass of milk. She set it down in front of me, her hand resting on my shoulder for just a second too long. "Drink this, dear," she said, her voice soft, almost loving. I looked at the glass, at the opaque, white liquid. It wasn't a drink. It was a dose. It was the first step in making me like my grandfather, the first nail in the coffin they were building for me. I looked up at her, then at my aunt, then at Mark. They were all watching me, their faces a carefully arranged picture of familial concern. I picked up the glass. My hand was perfectly steady. I brought it to my lips, forcing a small smile. "Thank you, Mother," I said, and I took a sip. The floor was cold against my cheek. That was the first thing.
The second was a low, humming vibration that seemed to be coming from inside my own skull. I pushed myself up, my arms feeling like they were filled with wet sand. I wasn't in my bed. I was on the floor of my room, next to the window, the heavy curtains still drawn tight. I had no memory of getting there. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick. I stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the doorframe for support. The man in the mirror was a stranger. His eyes were puffy and unfocused, his movements slow, delayed, like a video feed with a bad connection. I turned my head, and the reflection took a half-second to catch up. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I braced myself against the marble sink. What the hell was in that milk? It wasn't just a sedative. It was an eraser. It was stealing my time, my awareness. It was turning me into the man in the Polaroid. A quiet rage, slow and thick as molasses, began to move through me. They weren't just imprisoning me. They were dismantling me, piece by piece, from the inside out. This was not a fight I could win with my fists. It had to be with my head. And to do that, I needed my head back. That night at dinner, I played my part. I was subdued, compliant. I let my gaze wander aimlessly. I answered their questions with one-word answers. When my mother placed the glass of milk in front of me, I nodded my thanks, my eyes deliberately vacant. "Drink up, Alex," she said, her voice a soft poison. "It's important you get your rest." I raised the glass to my lips, making a show of taking a long swallow. But I didn't swallow. I held the thick, faintly sweet liquid in my mouth, the taste of it coating my tongue. I set the glass down, a little milk trickling from the corner of my mouth. Mark discreetly pushed a napkin toward me. They were watching my every move. When my aunt turned to say something to my mother about the gardeners, I seized the moment. I leaned forward, as if overcome by a wave of drowsiness, and let my head fall into my hands. Under the cover of the heavy damask tablecloth, I spat the mouthful of milk into my napkin. Later, when I was excused, I carried the crumpled napkin with me. In the privacy of my bathroom, I squeezed the milky mess into the toilet and flushed it away. This became my ritual, my secret act of rebellion. I hid a few bottles of water I'd managed to snag from a pantry, along with a box of stale crackers, under a loose floorboard in my closet. Each night they presented me with the glass of milk, and each night I performed my little act of illusion. I would drink a little, hold most of it, and find a way to dispose of it. Sometimes into the soil of a large potted fern in the hallway, sometimes directly down a sink when no one was looking. Slowly, day by day, the fog began to lift. The hum in my skull quieted. My movements became my own again. But I didn't let them see it. I continued to act slow, confused. I shuffled when I walked. I let my sentences trail off. I became the docile, medicated heir they wanted me to be. And because they believed they were in control, they became careless.
One evening, I pretended to fall asleep on the large leather sofa in the library after dinner. I let my head loll to the side, my breathing deep and even. The fire crackled in the hearth. My mother and my Aunt Catherine were sitting in the armchairs opposite me, their voices low and conspiratorial, confident that I was lost in my medicated haze. "He seems to be adapting better than Father did," my mother said. There was a faint note of satisfaction in her voice. "He's more like you," Catherine replied, the sound of her knitting needles a soft, rhythmic clicking. I kept my breathing steady. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. "Still," Catherine continued, "I think it's time. The longer we wait, the more of a chance there is for complications. Dr. Anderson can be here by Saturday." Dr. Anderson. The name sounded vaguely familiar. A friend of the family, I thought. A psychiatrist. "You're right," my mother sighed. "We should move him to the West Wing tomorrow. It's more secure. The staff there know the protocols." The West Wing. As a child, that part of the house had been forbidden territory, a place of hushed voices and strange medicinal smells. It was where they had kept my grandfather in his final years. "Will you speak to Mark?" my mother asked. "He's still
Sentimental about all this. "He'll do what's necessary," Catherine said sharply. "He understands the importance of the final therapy. It's a mercy, really, for him and for us." Final therapy. The phrase hung in the air, cold and sharp. It wasn't a treatment. It was an end point. It was the transfer my grandfather had completed. A quiet, clinical word for a procedure that hollowed a man out and left behind an obedient shell. They were going to do it to me on Saturday. I had less than 3 days. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my feigned slumber. I had to get out. I had to find a way. But how? The gates were locked, the windows bolted, my car disabled. They had thought of everything. Or had they? My father had lived in this prison for decades. He was an intelligent man, a meticulous man. He wouldn't have just accepted his fate without a fight, would he? There had to be something, a hidden key, a secret passage, a weapon, anything. That night, long after the house had fallen silent, I slipped out of my room. I didn't go downstairs. I went back to the one place I felt I might find an answer, my father's study, the room where my own imprisonment had begun. This time, I wasn't just looking, I was searching. I ran my hands over every inch of the carved wooden bookshelves, pressing on books, looking for a hidden latch. Nothing. I checked behind the heavy velvet curtains. Nothing. I pulled the rug back from the floor, looking for a trapdoor. Still nothing. Desperation clawed at me. I was running out of time. My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. My gaze fell on the enormous, dark wood wardrobe in the corner. It was as old as the house itself, a monolithic piece of furniture that smelled of cedar and decay. I had looked inside before, but it was empty save for a few forgotten moth-eaten suits. This time, I ran my hand along the inside back wall. It was paneled wood, just like the rest of the wardrobe. But as my fingers traced the seams, one section felt different. It gave way slightly under pressure. It wasn't solid. I pushed harder. My fingers found the edge of a board that was slightly loose. I worked my fingernails into the crack and pulled.
The small section of paneling came away with a soft groan of old wood. Behind it, in the dark, hollow space between the wardrobe and the wall, was a small, metal box. It was a simple, gray strongbox, the kind you might store petty cash in. It wasn't locked. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely work the latch. I lifted the lid. It was full of letters, dozens of them, bundled in string. They were envelopes addressed to a P.O. box in Boston, stamped and ready to be mailed, but they had never been sent. They were all in my father's familiar, sharp handwriting. I pulled out the one on top. It was dated 15 years ago. My hands shook as I unfolded the thin paper. "To whom it may concern," it began. "My name is Richard Davenport. I am a prisoner in my own home. For the past 20 years, my family, led by my own mother, has held me captive under the pretense of a fabricated medical diagnosis. I am writing this in the hope that someone, someday, will find it and know the truth. The Davenport legacy, the degenerative neurological disorder they speak of, is a lie. A cruel and brilliant lie, crafted by my mother to seize control of the family fortune from my father. She had him declared incompetent, using forged medical records from a colluding doctor. She locked him away and controlled everything. When I came of age and was set to inherit, she used the same lie against me. She told me I had the disease. She told me it was my duty to submit, to be managed for the good of the family. I was young. I believed her. I had to sit down. The air rushed out of my lungs. A lie. It was all a lie. My grandfather wasn't sick. My father wasn't sick. They were victims. I frantically tore through the other letters. They were a detailed chronicle of his life as a captive, his failed escape attempts, the druggings, the isolation, the constant psychological torture. He wrote about watching me and Mark grow up from a distance, a father who was not allowed to be a father, a man forced to play the part of a fragile invalid. The last letter was different. It was not in an envelope. It was a single sheet of paper, dated just 2 weeks before his death. Alex, if you are reading this, it means they have chosen you. It means I have failed.
I am so sorry. I tried to protect you by sending you away. I hoped they would pass you over, choose Mark instead. But your will is too much like mine. They fear you, just as they feared me. They are planning something. I can feel it. The sedatives are stronger. The doctor, Anderson, has been visiting more frequently. They talk in whispers about a permanent solution. I know what that means. My mother did it to my father. A crude surgery that takes away everything a man is. I will not let them turn me into a ghost in a chair. Not like him. This is not a suicide, Alex. It is an escape, my last one. The only one they cannot stop. This letter is my true last will and testament. The sickness is not in our blood. It is in their hearts. It is a poison of greed and control that has been passed down for generations. Do not let them do this to you. Fight. You are an architect. You see the flaws in structures. Find the flaw in this one. Burn it to the ground if you have to. Forgive me. Your loving father, Richard. I folded the letter, my knuckles white.
The cold clarity that washed over me was absolute. The dread was gone, burned away by a white-hot fury. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. He had killed himself. He chose death over what they had planned for him. The same thing they had planned for me on Saturday. I stuffed the letters into my pocket. My grief would have to wait. My father wasn't asking for justice. He was asking me to survive, to win. Burn it to the ground. And then I heard it. A sound from down the long, dark hallway. The slow, heavy tread of more than one person. They were coming up the stairs. Their footsteps were heavy, purposeful. They weren't coming to wish me a good night. They were coming to take me to the West Wing. They were coming to finish it. The footsteps weren't a surprise. I'd been waiting for them, a deer listening for the snap of a twig in a forest of predators. I held my father's last letter in my hand, the paper a brittle ghost against my skin. They were coming for me, coming to take me to the West Wing, to finish it. But my father's words echoed in my head. You are an architect. You see the flaws in structures. Find the flaw in this one. I didn't run for the door. I didn't try to barricade myself in. The flaw in this house wasn't in its walls or its locks. It was in their arrogance, their certainty. They saw me as a patient, a problem to be managed. They didn't see me as a threat. I folded the letter, stuffing it and the others deep into my pocket. And then I ran. Not up, not out. I ran down. Down the main staircase, my bare feet making no sound on the thick runner. Down past the somber portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me with cold disinterest. Down the narrow, winding set of service stairs that led into the cavernous dark of the basement. The air grew cold, thick with the smell of damp earth, dust, and the faint, sweet scent of decay from a century of forgotten things. I knew this basement. As a boy, I was fascinated by its labyrinthine layout, its hidden corners. I knew where the old wine cellar was, a room built like a vault, with a single, massive, iron-banded door and thick stone walls. I also knew where the main electrical panel was, an ancient, humming metal box that was a relic from the 1940s, a fire hazard waiting to happen. My pursuers were on the main floor now. I could hear their heavy, confident steps overhead, spreading out. "Alex," my mother's voice, sharp and commanding. "Don't make this difficult." I didn't have much time. I found a stray length of copper wiring left behind from some long-forgotten repair. Using a loose brick for leverage, I stripped the plastic coating from the ends. My hands weren't shaking anymore. A strange calm had settled over me, the kind of absolute focus an architect gets when staring at a complex blueprint. This was just a problem of structure and flow. Except the materials were flesh and blood. I pried open the rusted door of the panel. Inside was a rat's nest of cloth-wrapped wires and ceramic fuses. I found the main feed lines from the house. I took a breath. Then I jammed the ends of the copper wire across two of the main terminals. The spark was a brilliant, violent flash of white-blue light. A loud crackle filled the air, and the smell was immediate, acrid, choking, the smell of burning plastic and ozone.
I yanked the wire away as a thin tendril of greasy black smoke began to curl up from the panel, lazy at first, then thickening. I fanned it with a piece of cardboard, directing it towards the stairwell. I retreated into the shadows of the wine cellar's entryway, pressing myself flat against the cold stone wall. Now, I just had to wait for the house's nervous system to react. It didn't take long. A high-pitched mechanical shriek began to echo through the mansion. It wasn't a modern smoke detector's beep. It was an old industrial fire bell, a continuous, deafening clang that hammered at the senses. It was a sound designed to wake the dead. "What is that?" I heard Aunt Catherine shriek from above. The footsteps overhead changed from a confident search to a frantic scramble. "It's coming from the basement," Mark shouted. His voice was closer than the others. "The panel must have shorted. It smells like smoke." Of course, their greatest fear wasn't me escaping. It was losing this house, this monument to their power, the flaw in the structure. I heard them clattering down the wooden basement stairs. 3 sets of footsteps. Mother, Aunt Catherine, Mark. They came down in a rush, their figures silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway above. "The extinguishers are by the furnace," my mother commanded, her voice cutting through the din of the alarm. They ran right past my hiding spot, their eyes fixed on the source of the smoke. They were a single unit, a pack moving with one mind. As soon as the last of them, Mark, cleared the doorway into the main cellar area, I moved. I didn't sprint out the way they came in. I sprinted back towards them. I threw my entire body weight against the colossal oak and iron door of the wine cellar. It moved with a deep, groaning complaint of ancient hinges. It was heavier than I'd ever imagined. For a heart-stopping second, I thought it wouldn't close. Then momentum took over. Thoom. The sound was deep, final. It swallowed all the air. The clang of the fire alarm seemed to pause for a beat. There was a moment of confused silence from within. Then the hammering started. "Alex, what are you doing? Open this door!" My mother's voice, stripped of its authority, laced with a new, unfamiliar thread of panic. I didn't answer. My fingers found the locking mechanism. It wasn't a keyhole. It was a heavy, solid iron bolt set into the doorframe, the kind used to secure a fortress. My muscles screamed in protest as I slid the thick bar of metal across. It scraped against the rusted hasp. Then it fell into place with a dry, definitive click. The hammering became frantic, fists pounding against the 3-inch thick oak. "Alex, this isn't funny. Let us out." That was my aunt. Then Mark. "Alex, please, don't do this." A desperate pleading. Their screams began then. But the walls were stone, 3 feet thick. The sound was muffled, robbed of its terror, reduced to a dull, rhythmic thudding and a low, hopeless hum. Like listening to a desperate argument happening rooms away. I stood there for a second, my chest heaving, the stench of burned plastic in my lungs. I listened to my own breath, loud and ragged in the sudden quiet of my own mind. I left them there and walked back up the stairs, the fire bell still screaming its song through the empty house. There was no time to find a key, no time to try the main doors. I went to the grand drawing room on the first floor. Along one wall stood a magnificent stained glass window, depicting some long-dead Davenport ancestor conquering a wilderness. It had been bolted shut for 50 years.
I didn't look for a latch. I grabbed a heavy, carved oak armchair, the kind that takes 2 men to move. Adrenaline is a hell of a thing. I hoisted it, staggering under the weight. It felt impossibly heavy. I took 2 steps and heaved it with everything I had. The sound was not a shatter. It was an explosion of ice and color. The lead panes buckled and blew out, raining consecrated shards of ruby, sapphire, and emerald glass onto the stone patio outside. The night air rushed in, cold and clean. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled through the jagged hole I'd created. Pain, sharp and immediate, flared up my arm and leg. A shard of deep blue glass was jutting from my forearm. Another had sliced my calf open to the bone. I didn't feel it, not really, not yet. I landed hard on the flagstones outside, stumbled to my feet, and ran.
I ran without looking back. Into the dark woods that bordered the estate, the screaming fire bell fading behind me. Branches whipped at my face, roots tried to trip me. My lungs burned. Blood streamed down my arm and leg, warm and slick. Finally, my body just gave out. I burst through the tree line onto the asphalt of the old country road and collapsed, my vision swimming in black spots. The next thing I remember is headlights, the squeal of tires, a man's voice, distant and fuzzy. "Jesus Christ, kid, what happened to you?" When the police arrived at the Davenport estate, the fire bell was still ringing. They found me, bleeding and shivering, in the back of a trucker's cab, wrapped in a dirty blanket, mumbling about being held prisoner. They found the smashed window. And in the basement, they found my family. 3 people, locked in a stone vault, screaming hysterically about genetic legacies, final therapies, and their sacred duty. To the officers, it was the incoherent raving of mad people. My story, the one where the sane, successful architect from Chicago was kidnapped and drugged by his estranged, hysterical family, sounded a lot more plausible. Weeks passed. The legal battle was messy but swift. With the discovery of my father's letters and the testimony of the officers who found my family in their self-made asylum, it wasn't much of a fight. They were committed for psychiatric evaluation. The estate was frozen. I was, for all intents and purposes, free. I was back in my Chicago apartment, the clean lines and open spaces a balm on my frayed nerves. My wife, bless her, never once questioned me. She just held me when I woke up screaming at night. One afternoon, my father's old lawyer, a man I hadn't seen in over a decade, showed up at my door. He was holding a single, thick manila envelope. "Your father had some specific instructions, Alex," he said, his voice gentle. "This was to be delivered to you personally, and only after all other matters concerning the estate were settled. He paid me a retainer 20 years ago for this one task." He handed me the envelope and left. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a thick, bound document from a genetic testing laboratory in Boston. A comprehensive report. My father, ever the meticulous man, had secretly had the entire family's DNA tested years ago. I flipped through the pages of technical data, my heart pounding. I was looking for one thing: confirmation. The final nail in their coffin. Proof that the Davenport legacy was the lie my father said it was. I found the summary page. It listed each family member by name. Beside mine, it read, "Gene marker XYZ, negative."
Beside my father's, Richard Davenport, gene marker XYZ, negative. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me sick washed over me. It was true, all of it. It was a lie. Then my eyes drifted to the last two entries. My mother, Eleanor Davenport, negative. My aunt, Catherine Davenport, negative. And then the last name on the list, Mark Davenport. Gene marker XYZ, positive. Phenotype expression probability, 100%. I had to read it 3 times before the words registered, before the cold, awful weight of it settled in my gut. The sickness wasn't a lie. It was real. The entire system, the cruelty, the prison my father had lived in, it wasn't just about greed. It was a monstrous, twisted, and brutal attempt to contain a bomb that was very, very real. They just had the wrong man. For 2 generations, they had caged the healthy to protect the family name, all while the real carrier, my quiet, compliant, seemingly harmless younger brother, was the one who needed the cage all along. I folded the paper, my knuckles white. My father hadn't left me a fortune. He hadn't left me justice. He had left me the truth. He had killed himself to give me the keys to the asylum, and in my ignorance, I had let the only true patient run free. Now I am the head of the family, the sole guardian of my brother Mark, who will, one day, almost certainly be released. I am the shepherd, and I am entirely, utterly alone with the wolf. The Davenport legacy wasn't money. It was a curse, and it was mine now.